Everything in the universe moves. Planets spin, stars orbit, galaxies drift through the void like luminous tides. Even atoms vibrate, their electrons dancing around invisible hearts. Motion is existence itself, the pulse of reality, the breath of creation. But in early June 2025, that rhythm faltered. The James Webb Space Telescope, orbiting 1 million miles from Earth, recorded something it shouldn't have. The interstellar object 3IATLAS, first detected months earlier cutting across the outer solar system, had stopped moving. Not slowed, not curved, stopped. For 3 days, Webb's tracking instruments showed no change in position. Its parallax, the tiny shift in perspective that proves motion, had vanished. The object's trajectory, once measured with exquisite precision, had frozen in space like an insect trapped in amber. At first, it was dismissed as a calibration error. Webb's optics occasionally drift under thermal stress, creating illusions in the data. But when the European Southern Observatory, the Hubble Space Telescope, and radio observatories in Chile and Hawaii cross-checked the readings, they found the same result. No motion. The team reran the models. If the object were truly stationary relative to the Sun, it would defy every law of celestial mechanics. Nothing in the cosmos stands perfectly still. Every object is tugged by gravity, pushed by radiation, perturbed by tidal forces. Motion is inevitable. Stillness is impossible. And yet, 3IATLAS remained exactly where it was, a faint, cold glimmer between the orbits of Mars and Jupiter. Astronomers stared at their monitors in disbelief. The data didn't wobble, didn't drift. It was as if the object had anchored itself in a void that shouldn't exist, a place where momentum had simply stopped applying. Theories multiplied overnight. Maybe the object had encountered an unknown gravitational well, a hidden black hole, a dense mass of dark matter pulling against its inertia. But gravitational locks don't create stillness, they cause orbits. 3IATLAS wasn't orbiting anything, it was hovering. Some suggested an optical illusion caused by reflected light, but the reflected spectra didn't match any known cometary behavior. The object wasn't rotating or tumbling. Its brightness stayed constant, unwavering, like a fixed beacon. It wasn't natural. By June 10th, confirmation came from Japan's Subaru telescope and India's Astrosat observatory. Both reported identical positional data. Every photon, every radar ping returned the same coordinates. The news spread quietly among research networks. The public wouldn't hear for another week, but within the scientific community, the phrase non-kinetic anomaly began circulating. Some said it half-jokingly. Others said it with a kind of reverent dread. The deeper they looked, the stranger it became. The background stars behind 3IATLAS weren't behaving correctly. Their light, their apparent positions, warped subtly when viewed through the object's location. Not the gravitational lensing of a massive body, but the opposite, light bending away. It was as if space itself around the object were repelling movement, distorting everything that tried to pass through. NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory ran the numbers again. If the object had halted due to external force, the deceleration energy required would equal the total output of the Sun over 1 million years. No known process could achieve that. No impact, no propulsion, no natural law. Something wasn't adding up. By June 14th, the data reached a breaking point. When Webb refocused on the coordinates, its infrared instruments detected no heat trail, no residual motion signature. The object's speed, previously over 70,000 kilometers per hour, had dropped to 0. In physics, 0 is never absolute. There's always some movement, some drift, but the readings were clean. Stillness, complete and perfect. At mission control, the silence was heavy. You could hear the soft hum of servers, the whisper of air conditioning, and the unspoken realization forming behind every pair of eyes. Something had done this. Something had taken an object hurtling through interstellar space, an object that had traveled unbound for millions of years, and stopped it mid-flight. Around the world, astrophysicists tried to recreate the anomaly in simulation. They fed the data into orbital models, particle equations, quantum scale interpretations. Every result collapsed under its own contradictions. The object should have disintegrated instantly. Momentum doesn't vanish, it transfers. But no shockwave, no radiation burst, no energy dispersion appeared. It was as though the motion had been absorbed. And if motion could be absorbed, where had it gone? On June 16th, Webb's spectral array began detecting something new. The faintest emission, a pulse of infrared radiation repeating every 4.3 seconds. The same rhythm seen before in 3 IATLAS months earlier, when it bent the solar wind near the sun. The pulse was weak but constant, perfectly periodic. It was coming from the object itself, emanating like a heartbeat. The phrase spread across research channels. The object is alive. But alive wasn't accurate. Its thermal profile was too low for biology, too stable for decay. This wasn't organic heat, it was regulated emission, like a system maintaining equilibrium. And then came the strangest discovery of all. When Webb zoomed in, its photometers recorded a faint halo of diffraction around the object, not natural scattering, but structured geometry. Light waves interfering in patterns of impossible precision. It wasn't reflecting light, it was shaping it. For the first time, a few whispered what no one wanted to say aloud. Maybe 3 IATLAS wasn't an object at all. Maybe it was a mechanism, an instrument that had stopped itself. The data arrived in the middle of the night at JPL, a long string of positional coordinates that hadn't changed by a single digit. The timestamp confirmed it. Over 10 days of continuous observation, 3 IATLAS had not moved a single millimeter relative to background space. Not even the pressure of sunlight, the pull of gravity, or the motion of time itself had shifted it. The universe, as far as anyone understood it, was built on motion. Planets fall, light travels, entropy spreads. Everything moves towards something else. But now, a fragment of matter, a wanderer from beyond our solar system, had chosen to defy that rule. In telescopes across the world, the image of 3 IATLAS hung motionless, a perfect point of defiance glowing faintly in the dark. Theories collapsed one by one. Gravitational freeze, impossible. Magnetic suspension, absurd. Quantum phase lock, inconceivable on that scale. There was no physical law capable of holding a body that size perfectly still. And yet, there it was. The night before the story leaked, a scientist at ESA wrote a single line in her observation log. It would later circulate anonymously across message boards and encrypted networks. She wrote, "The universe moves. Everything moves. But tonight, something decided not to." When the log was recovered, her final note had been redacted except for one last sentence. The words that would echo across every lab, every observatory, every restless corner of human curiosity. The laws of motion had just broken in front of us. The night after the stillness was confirmed, the James Webb Telescope kept its gaze locked on 3 IATLAS. What had once been a routine observation had become something else. A vigil. For 72 hours, the object didn't move. Not a flicker, not a wobble. Its position relative to background stars was absolute, a point of defiance against every law of inertia and time. But the stillness wasn't dead. Infrared data began showing pulses. Faint, deliberate, rhythmic. Every 4.3 seconds, heat signatures rose and fell in a perfect wave. No natural process in deep space produces that kind of stability. Stars flare, comets outgas. Nothing breathes in time. The emission wasn't random, it was symmetrical. Its intensity scaled logarithmically, one pulse strong, the next weaker, then strong again, a ratio identical to biological respiration. It looked like a system regulating itself. At NASA, the term thermal modulation appeared in every report, but off record, people whispered another word: heartbeat. The longer they watched, the stranger it grew. Webb's instruments detected shifts in the object's infrared spectrum, slight color changes synchronized with the pulses. That meant something inside 3 IATLAS was cycling energy, converting it from one form to another. That shouldn't be possible. Comets don't self-regulate. Asteroids don't emit periodic thermal waves. Either the object was decaying in a perfectly rhythmic way, or it was controlling the decay. By the fifth day, radiative modeling showed that each pulse wasn't releasing energy, but absorbing it, heat disappearing into the object rather than out of it. It was feeding. Theories erupted. Maybe it was a crystalline body acting as a superconductor, storing ambient radiation. Maybe it was a naturally formed Dyson-like relic, designed to balance energy rather than emit it. But there was another possibility, one that froze the room whenever someone said it aloud.
What if 3IATLAS was operating? The word machine spread like static through the scientific community. No one wanted to believe it, but every data set pushed in that direction. The pulses weren't chaotic. They obeyed mathematical progression. Between each cycle was a perfect harmonic step, a structure indistinguishable from algorithmic regulation. On June 20th, Webb's data stream revealed a new phenomenon. Around the object's edges, light diffraction sharpened into bands, concentric layers that flickered in sequential order, forming what looked like a rotating field. Except nothing was rotating. The bands weren't motion, they were phase shifts. Electromagnetic fields switching states faster than light could travel through them. It was the optical equivalent of a thought. When scientists ran the data through spectral inversion, they noticed the frequencies arranged themselves into the same ratios found in the hydrogen line, 1,420 megahertz, the universal constant used in every human attempt to contact extraterrestrial intelligence. That couldn't be coincidence. Something inside 3IATLAS was emitting at the language of the cosmos itself. At JPL, analysts tried to model the emissions in 3D. The pulse pattern formed a spiral expanding outward, folding back upon itself in golden ratio intervals. Each cycle layered upon the last until the shape resembled a flower. Symmetrical, recursive, alive. The object wasn't chaotic, it was structured. They sent the data to quantum physicists, materials scientists, even biologists. The consensus was impossible. 3IATLAS behaved as if it had metabolism, an exchange of energy balanced with near-perfect efficiency. It was lifelike without being alive. Dr. Mira Han described it best during a late-night briefing. It's not conscious. It's not sentient, but it's acting like something that understands the rules it's breaking. Meanwhile, Webb recorded faint electromagnetic ripples radiating outward from the still body. The ripples propagated through interplanetary space like low-frequency waves in a sea of radiation. Every time one reached Earth, instruments twitched. Radio telescopes caught the same rhythm. The pulse was bleeding into everything. On June 23rd, a new signature appeared. High-energy photons began to scatter in pairs, opposite directions. Perfect symmetry. A phenomenon called quantum entanglement. But it wasn't happening at the quantum level. It was happening on a macroscopic scale, measurable across astronomical distances. Every time 3IATLAS pulsed, paired emissions appeared miles apart within the same moment, synchronized beyond the limit of light speed. Space itself was responding. At that point, NASA issued what they called Observational Containment Protocol. They didn't want anyone else looking. The anomaly had crossed from curiosity into existential risk, but secrecy couldn't hide the data. Civilian astronomers continued tracking it. The same pulse, the same intervals, the same impossible stillness. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the pattern changed. The object brightened, not gradually, but all at once, as if it had exhaled. A perfect geometric burst of light erupted and faded within seconds. When Webb recalibrated, the emission line had shifted again, aligning precisely with carbon-based molecular frequencies, the same bonds that form amino acids. It wasn't energy at all. It was chemistry. The object had started producing organic spectral signatures, formaldehyde, glycine, even traces of methane and ethane. It was manufacturing the precursors of life. Whatever 3IATLAS was doing, it was doing it with intent. Every pulse now carried a dual pattern, heat absorption followed by chemical emission. It was building, releasing, adjusting. The perfect self-regulating system. The question no one could answer was why. Was it repairing itself? Communicating? testing conditions for something yet to come. On the 12th day of stillness, Webb detected microfluctuations on the object's surface, flashes of pattern, symmetry, repetition. Binary at first, then fractal. Light pulses forming grids like neural activity in a brain scan. For the first time, 3IATLAS wasn't just still, it was thinking, or at least it behaved as though it were. By June 25th, the team had exhausted every explanation. They'd ruled out natural resonance, magnetic locks, gravitational balance. No physical force could make an interstellar object stop, absorb energy, and begin emitting complex chemistry and rhythmic harmony with its own stillness. And yet, it was all there. The data was real, so they turned to theory. Dr. Hahn proposed one more radical than all the rest. Maybe 3IATLAS wasn't violating motion. Maybe it was redefining it. Stillness, she argued, wasn't the absence of movement. It was the perfect balance of every force acting at once, an equilibrium so complete it appeared frozen. But that didn't explain the structure, or the chemistry, or the way light curved away from it like time recoiling. It felt intentional. When Webb zoomed in for one last high-resolution capture, the object's surface rippled, not physically but visually, as though a thin layer of reality itself was distorting around it. And through that distortion, for a fraction of a second, a new emission line appeared. It wasn't carbon or hydrogen this time. It was something else. An arrangement of spectral peaks forming a pattern identical to the frequency map of the human brain's alpha wave. 3IATLAS was mirroring us. For decades, humanity had built machines to observe the cosmos. Now something in the cosmos was reflecting us back. It wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't chaos. It was control. For 12 days, the universe held its breath. Every telescope pointed at 3IATLAS saw the same impossible sight, motionless perfection wrapped in radiating silence. The pulse continued, steady as a heart that belonged to something older than stars. It drew in heat, then released faint traces of carbon and nitrogen compounds, each emission more structured than the last. On June 27th, the James Webb Telescope recorded a new anomaly. The light from the object dimmed, not by distance but by choice. Its albedo, its reflective brightness, began to oscillate, rising and falling in measured cadence. To the instruments, it looked like breathing shadows. And within that dimming, Webb's spectrometer detected molecular complexity increasing by the hour. Amino precursors were now chaining into longer structures, polymer bonds that, under laboratory conditions, would evolve into proteins. The chemistry of life was emerging inside a fragment of frozen stone in interstellar space. At first, the team thought it was contamination, a misread from Webb's sensors. But cross-verification came from Hubble and the Atacama Array on Earth. The signature was real. 3IATLAS was building life in the dark. Yet the process wasn't random. Each formation pulse followed the same mathematical intervals as before. 4.3 seconds, golden ratio modulation, symmetrical absorption. The synthesis was rhythmic, almost musical. It wasn't evolution as we knew it. It was orchestration. By now, governments had gone silent. The few observatories still receiving live telemetry were cut from the network. Only fragments of data leaked through encrypted channels, enough for scientists to piece together the pattern. Every burst of organic emission corresponded to a mirrored dip in local magnetic fields, like the object was syncing with the fabric of space itself. Dr. Mira Hahn called it stillness resonance. She wrote in her final report, "If motion defines existence, then perfect stillness must define awareness." For the first time, the team began to wonder if they were watching a kind of consciousness, not biological but cosmic, a state of matter capable of pausing every force acting upon it until equilibrium became intelligence. Webb's data backed her theory. The object's emission spectrum began fluctuating in a pattern that mirrored the neural oscillations of deep meditation in the human brain. Alpha, theta, delta, the same frequencies that appear when living beings slip into silence. It wasn't mimicking life, it was demonstrating it. The stillness wasn't death, it was focus. On July 1st, the pulse stopped. For hours there was nothing, No heat, no light, no signal. Instruments fell quiet. Webb's sensors, tuned to the faintest flicker of infrared, saw only cold perfection. It looked as if the object had finally succumbed, burned out, vanished into entropy. But then faintly a ripple appeared behind it. Not light, not radiation. Space itself bending. The ripple spread outward, distorting starlight as it passed. Within its curvature, data analysts detected a gravitational phase shift, equivalent to an object of infinite symmetry folding in on itself. Every law of physics screamed against it. An object can't compress to zero without destroying itself. Yet 3IATLAS didn't collapse, it inverted.
The spectral pattern flipped. What had been absorption turned to emission, and for one blinding instant, the James Webb Telescope was flooded with structured light. Inside that light were ratios, mathematical fingerprints encoded in wavelength, prime sequences, the same constants that describe the architecture of atoms. The entire emission was a message written in physics itself. When decoded, the wave didn't form words. It formed geometry, a spiral uncoiling from the center outward, echoing the Fibonacci sequence that defines galaxies, hurricanes, and seashells. The object was communicating in the only language every living thing understands: pattern. Then it vanished. No explosion, no debris, just absence. The coordinates Webb had tracked for weeks were empty. The space it had occupied looked cleaner, brighter, as though motion had quietly resumed after holding its breath. For several hours afterward, a faint resonance passed through the solar system, barely measurable fluctuations in electromagnetic background noise. The pulse wasn't gone, it had diffused. Every observatory recorded the same oscillation: subtle, persistent, perfectly rhythmic. 4.3 seconds. It was everywhere. The object's stillness had spread like a wave, imprinting itself across the medium of space. Earth's magnetosphere twitched in time with it. The Van Allen belts shimmered. Even the sun's corona flickered once, its plasma rippling in a pattern so symmetrical that it couldn't be coincidence. The pulse had become universal. No one knew what it meant. Some thought the object had dissolved into quantum equilibrium, merging with the background field that connects all things. Others believed it had simply moved beyond observation, its stillness now too perfect for light to escape. Dr. Hahn wrote one final note before the project closed: "Motion is the language of matter. Stillness is the language of meaning." She suggested that 3IATLAS might have been neither a machine nor a life form, but a messenger, one that carries its truth not through words or waves, but through silence. That its stillness was an answer to a question humanity had been asking since the first telescope pointed toward the stars. Is anyone out there? Maybe, she wrote, the universe had already answered. Because when something that vast, that ancient, and that impossible stops moving, when it freezes against the tide of time and breathes the building blocks of life into nothingness, what else could that mean but awareness? Maybe consciousness isn't bound to biology at all. Maybe it's written into the architecture of reality itself, the symmetry between motion and rest, chaos and order, sound and silence. In the days after the light faded, Webb's deep field sensors picked up one last whisper of radiation. It wasn't coming from the coordinates of 3IATLAS anymore. It was coming from everywhere at once, evenly distributed across space like the hum of creation. When the data was translated into sound, it played a single tone: low, soft, steady. The same rhythm as before. 4.3 seconds. It wasn't random. It wasn't noise. It was continuity. The echo of something that had taught the universe how to pause. And in that pause, humanity learned something it had never known before: that even the cosmos needs to rest. That creation itself, for just a moment, had stood still long enough to look back at what it had made. The universe moves. It always has. But once, for a heartbeat measured in light years, something out there chose not to. And in that moment of stillness, we may have heard the sound of everything finally understanding itself.